Jack London's short story, To Build a Fire. The protagonist, an unnamed man, is traveling in winter along the frozen Yukon River. The land is covered in ice and snow, and the man follows a dark line of a trail. His character is described as without imagination, and he's unmoved and unconcerned with the beautiful and extremely dangerous environment around him. The man stubbornly cannot envision the danger of winter in the Yukon. He sees nature as something to overcome. The dog, a native husky, traveling with the man, is not just a companion, but a necessary tool. This dog is another main character. The dog thinks simple thoughts and has a greater instinctive understanding of his situation and his surroundings than his human companion. He's troubled by the extremity of the cold and longs for a fire or a shelter. His attitude toward the man is skittish and untrusting. He follows him out of fear and the need for survival rather than loyalty. It's worth noting that the dog is also a key symbol in the story and represents animal instinct and acts as a bridge between humans and the natural world. The dog is clearly still a part of the natural world as it retains its instincts and understands how to survive the cold weather without human tools. However, the dog also longs for the human tool of fire and stays close to the man even though it has no attachment to him. In this way, the dog remains both a part of the wild landscape and the human one. Though it chooses to stay near the humans it's become accustomed to, looking to them for food and warmth, it also understands survival in the wild. As such, the man displays no compassion for the dog and treats it harshly. His personality is cold and calculating and full of pride and hubris. As they walk, the man watches carefully for traps and springs beneath the snow, where warm springs bubble up and melt areas under the ice. At one point, he makes the dog go ahead of him to check the ground, and the dog breaks through the ice. When they stop to eat lunch, the man seems amused by the ice caking on his face and by his numb fingers. After a few moments, he can't feel tingling in his toes and wonders whether the toes were warm or numb. He feels his first spark of fear and manages to make a fire to get warm and eat his lunch, which also temporarily alleviates the dog's fear as well. After they've been walking again, the man now unexpectedly breaks through a spot in the snow where a spring was lurking and is soaked up to his knees. He finds a stash of firewood and kindling and quickly begins working to start a fire. And indeed, fire is one of the titular symbols and a key motif of the story, which frequently alludes to fire as a symbol of survival, of human technology and harmony with nature, and of life itself. To the man, fire is initially something to look forward to, which represents a break in his journey for lunch or the comforting end of his journey when he can arrive at camp. The full importance of fire for survival doesn't become clear to the man until he's beyond the ability to create it. On the other hand, the dog immediately yearns for fire, recognizing its ability to keep them safe from the cold and help them survive the deadly temperatures. Instinctively, the dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire. As illustrated by the dog's thought process, fire is not a regular part of the natural world, but is something humans create at will. In this way, the ability to create fire is an important symbol of survival tools for human beings, but one that benefits animals as well. The man, no longer generating any warmth from walking, begins to slow down, and he loses feeling in his hands and his feet, then in his face and skin. But the fire begins to burn. The man remembers the advice given to him by the old-timer on Sulphur Creek, not to venture into the Klondike alone when the temperature reached below 50 degrees. This third character, the old-timer of Sulphur Creek, never actually appears in the story, but the man remembers his advice about the dangers of traveling alone when the temperature drops really low. The wise old-timer acts as a mental companion who the man both agrees and disagrees with, even though he should be listening to him. And while the man struggles to survive, snippets of their conversation appear vividly. Both times the man builds a fire. The smug man smiles at the old-timer's advice and thinks any man who was a man could travel alone. However, just as he's about to cut off his moccasins and warm his frozen feet by the growing fire, the tree he built his fire under dumps a load of snow and snuffs it out. Painfully aware that he's now in serious danger, the man works quickly to build a new fire. He tries to keep calm, but his hands are so frozen and clumsy he can't even feel the piece of bark in his pocket he uses for kindling. He manages to beat feeling back into his hands and retrieve the bark, but drops his matches in the snow. He manages to light all of the matches at once and hold them to the birch bark, but in the process, he severely burns his badly numbed hands. He awkwardly tries to feed the fire with his frozen hands and accidentally drops a clump of moss on the twigs that scatters them, putting out the flame. While the man struggles in vain to start a fire, the dog watches. The man gets a wild idea to kill the dog and use its body to warm his hands. But when he calls the dog, there's a suspicious note of fear in his voice that frightens the dog, and it refuses to come any closer. The man crawls after the dog and manages to grab it, but he has no way to kill the animal with his frozen, helpless hands, so he lets it go. The man begins to panic and runs around wildly in an attempt to thaw his feet and warm his body. He tries to run the rest of the way to the camp where his companions are waiting for him, but he lacks the endurance. Eventually, the man stumbles and stops to rest, but then panics and begins to run again. The dog stays with him through all of this. Seeing the dog warm and in no immediate danger of dying enrages the man, and he yells at the dog. He begins to imagine his companions at camp coming to find his frozen body. He sees a vision of the old timer on Sulphur Creek and mumbles, "You were right, old hoss. You were right." At this point, readers will note that Jack London uses the old timer on Sulphur Creek as a symbol of the side of humanity that has kept touch with nature and instinct. The old timer symbolizes temperance, wisdom, and knowledge. The advice he offers has the power to save the man's life if only the protagonist would have listened to it. The old-timer's advice at least manages to repeatedly save the man from breaking through the ice and helps him understand what he needs to do in certain situations. But the greater piece of advice, to abstain from travel, is ignored. The man's visions of the old-timer here at the story's end indicates the man's final understanding of the knowledge and wisdom the old-timer embodied. But this realization comes upon him too late. The man drifts off into the most comfortable, satisfying sleep he's ever known. The dog sits by the man and waits for him to rise, but he lies still. Finally, the dog smells death on him and leaves the body, heading to the camp to find food and warmth. As he introduces the protagonist, the narrator informs the reader of the flaws that will become the man's downfall. He lacks imagination, and this makes him unable to envision the dangers that could befall him in a situation of such extreme cold, alone in the remote wilderness. As a newcomer to the land, his lack of concern about its dangers sets a tone of warning and recklessness. The narration itself adds to the ominous tone as the story progresses, illustrating the man's awareness of the motif of cold, with brief asides such as, "It certainly was cold." This repetition not only helps develop the creeping sense of danger, but also makes the intense cold much more visceral for the reader. The description of the effects of this bitter chill, repeatedly and in a tone of vague surprise, helps it creep into the reader's consciousness in tangible, disturbing ways. As part of the literary naturalist movement, the themes of instinct, pride, and man versus nature are central to many of Jack London's writings. In To Build a Fire, these themes take on more specific forms, illustrating for the reader the perils of the relationships among humans, animals, and nature. Instinct is a theme that goes hand in hand with the literary naturalist movement, which strives to examine humans without preconceived moral parameters, scrutinizing them as both human animals and flawed beings. In To Build a Fire, the protagonist is far removed from his survival instincts because neither he nor his recent ancestors have had any need for them. And his instincts are replaced by knowledge, or what he thinks he knows, and pride. These tools help him navigate the extreme cold and wilderness of the Yukon for a short while on his own. In the end, however, they are not enough to save him from nature's ambivalence. The dog, on the other hand, is an animal of pure instinct, making decisions that allow his survival in a harsh and extreme environment. The dog's instincts also inform him to stay with the man because he recognizes the importance of a partner and fellow pack member in order to survive. The prideful man lacks this partnership instinct. The theme of pride underscores the man's actions, and his downfall pivots around his arrogance and overconfidence. He's clearly received good advice from a local older man who knows the region and its dangers. Yet he derisively refers to the old-timer as womanish because he believes the old-timer's advice somehow does not apply to him. The protagonist sees himself, for the most part, as being above this advice and the dangers of the environment. Not until it is too late does he begin to see value and truth in the old-timer's wisdom, whose lesson about the dangers of human pride cost the man his very life. Man versus nature is a powerful theme too. London uses the two characters of the man and the dog, juxtaposed with an extreme version of the natural world, to highlight the conflicts and overlaps between instinct and reasoning, which London refers to as judgment in the story. The man represents the far end of one extreme. He has no name and is a symbol of a certain aspect of humanity that's completely lost its connection with nature and its own inner instincts. The man's disconnection with his natural instincts affects his ability to make sound judgments about the perilous situation he's in. However, because he's capable of reasoning, the man feels more powerful than nature itself. The dog is mostly of the natural world, but also acts as a bridge between man and nature. Just as the man is representative of a particular contingent of the human race, the natural setting in the story embodies the extreme side of nature, harsh, deadly, and unforgiving in every way. London pits these two sides against one another, and humanity quickly folds under the power of the natural world. London's writings give reverence to nature's ability to wipe out humanity, and to humans' place in the natural world as being little different from that of any other animal. In the end, neither nature nor the dog care about whether the man lives or dies, and the man's overconfidence in his own power leads to his demise.